childhood and conditioning, how my sister learned to control, and I learned to stay silent. I never thought I would tell this story publicly. Not because it's dramatic. Not because it's shocking on the surface. But because for most of my life, I was taught that talking about it was the real betrayal. This is a story about my sister. But more than that, it's a story about how families quietly create monsters, and then punish anyone who notices. I grew up believing my sister was different. People like to say every family has roles. The golden child. The problem child. The quiet one. The caretaker. In our family, my sister was special. That word followed her everywhere. She's just more sensitive. She feels things deeply. You know how she is. I heard those phrases before I could fully understand what they meant. But I understood the outcome very clearly. Whatever she did, we adapted. Whatever I felt, I adjusted. She wasn't older than me by much, less than 2 years, but emotionally, she was always positioned above me. Louder. More expressive. More urgent. And urgency became her greatest weapon. Early lessons, her emotions had consequences. Mine did not. When we were kids, conflicts followed a predictable pattern. If I got upset, I was told, "Stop overreacting. Don't be dramatic. Why can't you just let it go?" If she got upset, the house shifted. Voices lowered. Schedules changed. Explanations were demanded, not from her, but from everyone else. I learned very early that peace depended on her comfort, not fairness. And I learned something else just as important. If she cried, someone paid for it, and it was never her. The first time I realized the rules were different. I remember one incident clearly. I was maybe 9 or 10. She had taken something of mine, a small thing, nothing valuable. I confronted her. She denied it. I insisted. She laughed. Later, when I found it in her room and brought it to my parents, I expected, at least, acknowledgement. Instead, my mother sighed and said, "Why are you trying to start problems?" That sentence rewired something in me. Because suddenly, telling the truth was framed as aggression. My sister watched the entire exchange quietly. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just observed. That was the first time I understood. She didn't need to win arguments. She needed to reshape reality. How she learned to play the victim perfectly. My sister was never openly cruel. That's important. She didn't insult me directly. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She did something far more effective. She performed vulnerability. A shaky voice. A sudden silence. A well-timed tear. And adults rushed in to protect her, from discomfort, from accountability, from consequences. Meanwhile, I was praised for being easy. "You're so independent. You don't need much. You're the strong one." What they really meant was, "You don't cost us emotional energy." I became the one who didn't need anything. By middle school, the pattern was fully set. If my sister was struggling, everyone knew. If I was struggling, it was invisible, even to me. I stopped asking for help. Stopped complaining. Stopped expecting fairness. Because expectations were dangerous. They created disappointment. And disappointment, in our family, was treated like disrespect. The subtle shift, when control replaced chaos. As we got older, something changed. My sister became calmer on the surface, but more strategic underneath. She learned when to speak, when to stay silent, when to involve others, when to let someone else fight for her. She didn't need to accuse me directly anymore. She would say things like, "I don't know. I just feel unsafe. I'm probably wrong, but something feels off. I hate conflict, but..." And suddenly, I was being evaluated, not her behavior. I didn't realize it then, but this was conditioning. Not just for me, for everyone. The family learned to orbit her feelings. By the time we were adults, my sister wasn't demanding attention. She was receiving it automatically. Family plans adjusted around her mood. Disagreements ended when she disengaged. Decisions were delayed until she felt okay. And I played my role perfectly. I stayed quiet. I stayed reasonable. I stayed invisible. Because invisibility felt safer than being misrepresented. The lie I believed for years. For a long time, I told myself, she doesn't mean to do this. She's just wired differently. She's not malicious. And maybe, at first, that was true. But intent stops mattering when patterns harden. Because by adulthood, my sister wasn't just reacting emotionally. She was using emotion as leverage. And I was still the easiest piece on the board. The calm before everything changed. If you asked anyone back then, they would have said we were fine. Not close, but civil. Not warm, but functional. That's how these stories usually begin. Because control doesn't look like control when you're inside it. It looks like normal. It looks like family. It looks like something you'll deal with later. I didn't know yet that, later, was coming. And when it did, it would force me to confront a truth I had avoided my entire life. My sister didn't just need to be protected. She needed someone to dominate. And for a very long time, that someone was me. Adulthood and escalation, how my sister turned everyone against me without ever raising her voice. There's a dangerous myth about growing up. People like to believe that childhood dynamics disappear once everyone becomes an adult. That maturity, distance, and independence magically reset the rules. They don't. They refine them. When we became adults, I thought the game was over. When we moved out, started our own lives, got jobs, relationships, responsibilities, I genuinely believed the power imbalance would fade. We weren't under the same roof anymore. We weren't competing for attention. We weren't children. I was wrong. What actually happened was worse. My sister didn't lose influence, she outsourced it. The first adult conflict that didn't make sense. The first real fracture happened over something objectively small. A family event. A shared responsibility. A plan that needed coordination. I expressed a preference. Not a demand. Not an ultimatum. Just, I'd rather do it this way. The reaction was immediate and disproportionate. She went quiet. Withdrew. Stopped responding. A few days later, my phone started buzzing. Not from her. From others. Are you okay? She's really hurt. You should apologize. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted her. I hadn't refused anything outright. But somehow, I was now the aggressor. That was the first time I realized something chilling. She no longer needed to confront me directly. She could activate the room without being present. How she built a narrative without facts. My sister never lied outright. That's how she avoided being caught. Instead, she used implication. I don't think he meant to hurt me, but... I'm probably just sensitive, but it felt intentional. I hate drama, but I need to protect myself. Those sentences did all the work. They painted me as careless, emotionally unsafe, subtly hostile. And because I didn't defend myself loudly, the silence filled itself. People assumed guilt. I tried explaining. That was my second mistake. At first, I thought honesty would fix it. I explained my side calmly, privately, respectfully. That only made things worse. Because explanations were reframed as defensiveness, justification, manipulation. The more reasonable I sounded, the colder people became. And slowly, I noticed something terrifying. The version of me being discussed wasn't me anymore. Allies I didn't know I was losing. Friends I'd known for years started acting differently. Less eye contact. Shorter conversations. Polite distance. Family members stopped asking my opinion. Stopped including me in decisions. Stopped telling me things until after they were done. Not openly. Quietly. That's how social exile actually works. Not through confrontation, through omission. The weaponization of concern. One phrase kept coming up again and again. We're just worried about her. as if concern justified everything. Any boundary I set became proof I was cold. Any distance I took became proof I was resentful. Any silence became proof I was harboring something. Meanwhile, my sister continued doing what she did best: appearing fragile, appearing hurt, appearing reasonable. She never demanded loyalty. She evoked it. The moment I understood the pattern, it finally clicked during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I walked into a room mid-sentence. Someone said, "We just need to keep things calm for her." Not, "What's fair?" Not, "What actually happened?" Just, "Keep her comfortable." And suddenly, everything from childhood snapped into place. This wasn't conflict. This was maintenance. The family wasn't resolving issues, they were managing her reactions. And I was collateral damage. Why I became the perfect villain. Here's the cruel irony. I was independent, stable, functional. That made me expendable. I didn't cry publicly. I didn't ask for support. I didn't perform pain. So when tension arose, the choice was easy. Support the one who appears to suffer, not the one who can survive. I became the strong one. And strength, in dysfunctional systems, is punished. The incident that changed everything. The escalation reached its peak at a family gathering. Something trivial was said. A joke. A comment. Nothing cruel. My sister froze. Her face changed. She stood up. Left the room. Minutes later, I was surrounded. Accusations? Shock. Disbelief. "How could you say that? She's devastated. You went too far." I hadn't even spoken to her directly. I realized then. I was no longer reacting to events. I was reacting to interpretations. And interpretations were no longer under my control. The breaking point, when silence became impossible. That night, I went home and didn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Because I was awake to something I couldn't unsee. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't sensitivity. This wasn't trauma alone. This was power. Quiet. Social. Weaponized. And I had spent my entire life feeding it by staying calm. The decision that terrified me. I understood something terrifying. If I didn't change my behavior, this would never end. But changing it meant doing the one thing I had avoided my entire life. Naming the pattern. Not accusing. Not attacking. Naming. And in families like mine, naming the pattern is considered the ultimate betrayal. Because it threatens the illusion. The cost of awareness. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every interaction suddenly had subtext. Every reaction revealed alliances. Every silence carried meaning. And I knew. The next step wouldn't be quiet. It would be explosive. Because people who benefit from silence panic when it breaks. And my sister had built her entire identity on controlled perception. Exposure, collapse, and the aftermath no one talks about. There's a moment in every long-running psychological conflict where one side realizes the other has stopped cooperating. Not fighting. Not complying. Not explaining. Just withdrawing consent. That moment is terrifying for people who rely on control. The first retaliation, character assassination disguised as concern. The shift was subtle at first. I stopped explaining myself. Stopped apologizing for things I hadn't done. Stopped rushing to smooth over her emotions. I wasn't hostile. I wasn't cold. I was neutral. And neutrality, to someone who feeds on reaction, feels like aggression. Within weeks, the narrative changed. Not dramatically. Strategically. I started hearing phrases like, "He's changed. He's distant lately. I don't recognize him anymore." Nothing concrete. Nothing actionable. Just enough to plant suspicion. That's how reputations are dismantled, without evidence. The rumors got more specific. Soon, concern turned into speculation. People began asking me questions that felt rehearsed. Are you okay mentally? Are you under a lot of stress? Did something happen that made you bitter? At first, I laughed it off. Then I realized something chilling. These weren't questions. They were diagnoses. Someone was preparing the room to doubt my credibility before I ever spoke. The setup I walked into blindly. The confrontation didn't happen when I expected it. It happened during what was supposed to be a casual dinner. Family. Friends. Safe setting. I was halfway through a sentence when she interrupted me. Calm. Soft-voiced. Measured. I think this is a good example of what I've been trying to explain, she said. Everyone turned to me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted anyone. I hadn't even been emotional. But suddenly, I was on trial. How the trap worked. She didn't accuse me of anything specific. That was the brilliance of it. Instead, she described how I made her feel. Confused. Unsafe. Emotionally overwhelmed. She spoke slowly. Tearfully. Reluctantly. I didn't want to bring this up, but I feel like I have to protect myself. That sentence landed like a grenade. Because once someone frames themselves as needing protection, the other person becomes a threat, automatically. When I finally spoke, everything shifted. I realized something important in that moment. If I defended myself emotionally, I would confirm the story. If I stayed silent, I would confirm the story. If I left, I would confirm the story. There was only one option left. I named the pattern. Not loudly. Not angrily. Clearly. I said, I think what's happening here isn't about what I said tonight. I think it's about how conflict has always been handled, by centering one person's emotions and treating everyone else's boundaries as harm. The room froze. People don't react well when you name a system they benefit from. The immediate backlash. The response was instant. Gasps. Outrage. Accusations. How dare you? This is exactly what we mean. You're proving her point. My sister started crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. And suddenly, nothing I said mattered anymore. That was the moment I understood. Truth doesn't win against a well-maintained narrative. It destabilizes it, and that's worse. The final attempt to break me. Over the next few weeks, the pressure escalated. Messages. Interventions. Heart-to-heart. Conversations. All variations of the same theme. Apologize. Backtrack. Restore peace. Not because I was wrong, but because my presence without submission was intolerable. One person finally said it out loud. Can't you just let this go for the sake of the family? And that's when the truth became undeniable. The choice that ended everything. I realized I had two options. Stay connected and erase myself. Leave intact and become the villain. I chose the second. Not impulsively. Not dramatically. I stepped back. No announcements. No ultimatums. No final speeches. I simply stopped participating. What happened when I left? The system didn't heal. It collapsed. Without me absorbing tension, it had nowhere to go. Conflicts intensified. Alliances shifted. Someone else became the problem. That's the secret no one tells you. When you leave a dysfunctional role, the dysfunction doesn't disappear, it just looks for a new host. The silence that followed. Weeks passed. Then months. No apologies. No accountability. No understanding. Just distance. And in that distance, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. The grief that came after freedom. Freedom didn't feel like relief at first. It felt like grief. Grief for the version of my sister I thought existed. Grief for the family dynamic I spent decades trying to earn a place in. Grief for the belief that if I stayed kind enough, calm enough, patient enough, I'd be safe. I wasn't grieving her. I was grieving the lie. What I learned too late, but not too late. Here's what this experience taught me. Emotional fragility can be weaponized. Calm people are often scapegoated. Silence is interpreted however power needs it to be. And not everyone who cries is hurt. Some people cry because control is slipping. Why I'm telling this story? I'm telling this because someone reading this recognizes it. The constant self-questioning. The quiet guilt. The exhaustion of being the reasonable one. If that's you, hear this clearly. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not abusive for naming patterns. You are not broken because peace required your silence. The final truth. My sister didn't destroy my relationships. She revealed which ones required me to disappear. And once I stopped disappearing, the truth surfaced, painfully, publicly, and permanently. Final words. Walking away didn't make me weak. It made me real. And losing people who only loved the version of me that stayed quiet was not a loss. It was a correction.